Wheaton College believes offering yoga courses contributes to the college mission to serve Jesus Christ and advance his kingdom by educating the whole person through a redeemed form of yoga that addresses physical, emotional, and spiritual needs. In 2015, Wheaton issued a 4-page position statement to reassure fellow evangelicals that the college had redeemed yoga from its non-Christian roots. Yoga needed redemption because it is, quote, undeniably rooted in Hinduism, and one common postural sequence, the sun salutation, Sanskrit Surya Namaskara, originated as worship to the solar deity Surya, unquote. What redeems yoga at Wheaton is, first, that it is taught by Christians who signed the Wheaton College Statement of Faith. Second, instructors subtract ancient and sometimes religious words and add Christian belief statements. At the start or end of class, they lead a prayer, offer scripture, or a word of spiritual encouragement. Although offered by the athletics department, Wheaton envisions yoga as more than exercise. Quoting an arsenal of biblical proof texts, Wheaton argues that yoga helps Christians be still in God's presence, Psalm 46:10, avoid being anxious, Matthew 6:25-27, and manifest fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:22-23. Wheaton yoga looks a lot like traditional yoga. Classes begin sitting cross-legged in Padmasana or lotus to find mental stillness. The next 30 to 50% of a class consists of Surya Namaskaras. The Wheaton brochure labels some poses in English and others in Sanskrit, for instance, mountain, chaturanga, and downward dog. Classes end with Shavasana, or corpse. Although implying that the substitution of English and Christian language redeems yoga from Hinduism, Wheaton adopts the same pose sequences and even some terms from unredeemed yoga. This evening, I want to consider what the cultural mainstreaming of yoga and meditation, including Christian yoga and public school yoga, tell us about the relationship between Christianity and American culture. Prior to the 1960s, yoga was culturally marginal in the United States. Polls show a steady rise from 3% of Americans practicing yoga in 1976 to 15% in 2016. Yoga is often marketed as a scientifically validated, secular technique for cultivating beautiful, physically fit bodies, and many practitioners see yoga as purely physical. Yet, a quarter of American practitioners cite spiritual development as a goal. Half of all instructors are certified by the Yoga Alliance, which requires studying yoga philosophies and traditional texts such as the Yoga Sutras, Hatha Yoga Pradipika, or Bhagavad Gita that are widely associated with Hinduism, among other traditions. Certification covers yoga lifestyle, the precept of nonviolence, ahimsa, dharma and karma, energy anatomy, chakras, nadis, chanting, mantra, and meditation. Yoga exemplifies significant flows and rifts in American culture, including its Christian subcultures. Many Americans who resent Protestant dominance in cultural institutions such as public schools envision yoga spirituality as a preferable option for moral cultivation. Certain evangelicals and Pentecostals view yoga as idolatry or an opening to demonic spirits. Other Christians, among them certain Catholics and mainline Protestants, use yoga to fill gaps in Christian practice. I find it particularly revealing to examine the evangelical strategy of Christianizing yoga through linguistic substitution. Conversely, in 2013, evangelical parents in California sued the Encinitas Union School District for promoting Hinduism through Ashtanga yoga. Sedlak v. Baird's failure to dislodge yoga exposes tensions in Christian anti-yoga and pro-yoga positions that stem from a belief-centered understanding of religion. I argue that although many evangelicals feel like an embattled minority, they are complicit in cultural movements that marginalize them. I make 3 claims. First, naivete about how practices can change beliefs may undercut evangelical doctrines, as Christian yoga practitioners potentially experience subtle shifts in worldview. Second, evangelicals' ineffective resistance to or support of public school yoga and mindfulness meditation may facilitate mandatory programs in which children and teachers are required to participate. Third, Christians may impede their evangelistic goals by making themselves vulnerable to charges of cultural appropriation and cultural imperialism. To develop these arguments, let's begin by historically contextualizing Christian yoga as the latest instance of a recurrent struggle to navigate between Christ and culture. We will compare yoga to fiction, music, and aerobics,
we will interrogate evangelical assumptions about beliefs and practices, and we will assess why and how yoga divides Christians. Next, we'll examine nominally secular public school yoga through a case study of Ashtanga yoga.
And finally, we'll consider how Christian and secular yoga may exacerbate intercultural tensions. In 1951, the theologian H. Richard Niebuhr identified an enduring problem of the relationship between Christ and culture, as Christians strive to live in the world without being of the world. Self-identified evangelicals imagine themselves as avoiding the poles of cultural withdrawal or assimilation of worldly values, instead balancing purity from and presence in the world. Evangelicals characteristically adapt cultural resources for Christian purposes. Historically, evangelicals have often debated whether certain cultural products are inherently corrupting. Two notable examples are fiction and music. Into the mid-19th century, many evangelicals worried that fiction was too dangerous to touch. In the 1856 book, Religious Novels, An Argument Against Their Use, Charles Wesley Andrews laments that the best novelists brought in the Trojan horse, because preaching truth through fiction is no better than preaching temperance through rum. Godly texts engage intellectual interest to provoke moral action, but novels like rum hurl readers into the fire of consuming passion and then at last into the fire which is unquenchable. Evangelicals gradually became more comfortable with novels, publishing bestsellers such as Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, Charles Sheldon's In His Steps, and Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins' Left Behind. A similar story can be told of evangelicals' halting acceptance of popular music. Protestant reformers like John Calvin worried that the writing of extra-biblical hymns and psalm paraphrases introduced heresy into the church. 18th and 19th century revivals spread as innovators such as Isaac Watts, Charles Wesley, Fanny Crosby, and Ira Sankey wrote hymns, even very occasionally putting Christian lyrics to popular drinking tunes. As Salvation Army founder William Booth famously, though not originally, quipped, "Why should the devil have all the best tunes?" The phenomenon of contemporary Christian music, CCM, is the offspring of an unlikely mating of rock and roll youth culture with the Jesus movement of the 1960s to 70s. Older Christians objected that rock music, and especially loud drums and electric guitars, were inherently evil. The founder of Sparrow Records, Billy Ray Hearn, notes a pattern. When something new comes along, the church usually rejects it. Then they tolerate it, then it becomes acceptable, and finally, it becomes traditional. Churches initially viewed Christian fiction, Christian music, and Christian yoga with suspicion, and Christians who wanted to participate had to justify their choices. Over time, participation was normalized. Christian alternatives allow Christians both to participate in and view themselves as purer than popular culture. In their study of CCM, sociologists Jay Howard and John Streck observed that Christian variants permit subcultures to define themselves as somehow separate from the wider culture, even if they share economic, social, and religious formations. In 2016, Americans spent $16 billion on yoga classes, clothing, and accessories. Christian products fill a market niche. As the cultural commentator South Park noted in 2003, Christian producers have a built-in audience.
Our band should play Christian rock. Christian rock? Think about it. It's the easiest, crappiest music in the world, right? If we just play songs about how much we love Jesus, all the Christians will buy our crap. That's a retarded idea, Cartman. It worked for Creed. I don't want to be in a stupid Christian rock band. You just start that way, Stan, then you cross over. It's genius. Just get the hell out of here, Cartman. You're not serious and you're a detriment to the band. Oh, yeah? I will bet you $10 that if I start a Christian rock band, I can get a platinum album before you guys do. You're on. Gentlemen, we're about to embark on the most amazing, life-affirming, financially wind-falling experiences of our young lives. Wow! We are going to start a Christian rock band. I'm out. Wait! Walk out that door, Token, and you'll regret it the rest of your life. Christians have a built-in audience of over 180 million Americans. If each one of them bought just one of our albums at $12.95, that would be $2,331,000,000. Still want to leave, Token? Thank you. All right, guys, this is going to be so easy. All we have to do to make Christian songs is take regular old songs and add Jesus stuff to them. See? All we have to do is cross out words like baby and darling and replace them with Jesus.
The development of Christian yoga is in certain respects nothing new. It may be viewed as a subgenre of a Christian diet, fitness, therapeutic self-help market that, as the ethnographer Marie Griffith argues, reflects a white, middle-class American Protestant valorization of bodily health and beauty as spiritual virtues. When aerobics emerged as the fitness craze of the 1970s to 80s, Christians jumped in energetically, branding their own products. As yoga surpassed aerobics in popularity, Christian yoga perhaps inevitably followed. Is Christian yoga comparable to Christian fiction, Christian music, and Christian aerobics? All of these movements appeal for similar reasons, by inviting experiential, physically engaged, and/or emotionally rich encounters with God. They all reflect a belief-centered understanding of religion, which breeds confidence that meanings can be transformed by emptying and refilling neutral containers with Christian linguistic content, much like substituting ingredients in a recipe. I want to suggest that despite these similarities, Christian yoga is more of a stretch, myopic about the potential for practices to change beliefs, and prone to charges of cultural appropriation and cultural imperialism. Evangelicals identify a Christian as one who believes and tells others the gospel. A favorite Bible verse is Romans 10:9. If you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. If right beliefs constitute the core of true religion, one's intent in performing practices largely determines whether or how those practices are religious. This doctrinal view is naive to how practices might transform beliefs, whether through metaphysical or material mechanisms. Certain Hindu yoga proponents express an experiential view of religion based on metaphysical assumptions of how practices transform beliefs. The Hindu American Foundation argues that even when yoga is practiced solely as exercise, it cannot be completely delinked from its Hindu roots because asanas or postures have psychospiritual effects. Specifically, yoga, like its Hindu origins, does not offer ways to believe in God, it offers ways to know God. Asanas lead practitioners along the path of self-realization, that each individual is a spark of the divine. Expect conflict if you are sold on the exclusivist claims of the Abrahamic faiths. Hinduism Today's managing editor, Sannyasana Rugamaswamy, predicts that a Christian trying to adapt these practices will likely disrupt their own Christian beliefs. One need not accept metaphysical reasoning to make an empirical observation that long-term yoga practice correlates with heightened spirituality. A U.S. nationwide survey by psychologist Crystal Park reported in 2014 that 62% of yoga students, N equals 360, and 85% of teachers, N equals 156, changed their primary reason for practice. The primary motive typically changed from exercise and stress relief to spirituality. Of students reporting a change, spirituality became the primary motive for 24% and an additional motive for 48%. 50% of teachers attested that spirituality became their primary motive, and the remaining 50% came to identify spirituality as an additional motive. A 2005 study found that longer-term yoga practitioners were less likely to identify as Christian and more likely to identify as spiritual but not religious or Buddhist. Other studies suggest that a shift seems to take place, leading practitioners to a whole new spiritual awareness and totally identifying with a yoga philosophy. Take Kristen, a young woman from Indiana who grew up Catholic and tried yoga in college starting with the physical aspects. Kristen sensed no religious conflict because they have yoga at the YMCA and that's a Christian organization. Over time, Kristen came to see the 8 limbs of Ashtanga yoga, the 8th of which is samadhi, defined as becoming one with God, as basically similar to the 10 Commandments, only better because just like suggestions, unlike rule-oriented Christianity. A goal of my current book project is to account for such data by articulating a theory to explain how embodied practices such as yoga and meditation might affect religious and spiritual experiences. In brief, research on language, embodiment, and perception suggests that sensory and affective experiences of practicing yoga or mindfulness or participating in practice communities shape perception through 1, interplay of heightened awareness of sensory experiences, 2, reinterpretation of experiences through the lens of assumptions and values communicated, and 3, cultural associations that remain available after subtracting religious language. Because embodied, regularly repeated, and emotionally charged, such practices may be more efficacious than doctrinal teachings in conveying and reinforcing religious meanings. Doctrinal interpretations of religion notwithstanding, few Christian commentators argue that yoga is a purely physical practice. Where they disagree is whether yoga spirituality is antagonistic or complementary to Christianity. Polls report that 9% of Americans who have not tried yoga and 4% of those who stopped give the reason the spirituality of the practice bothers me. Catholic doctrinal statements warn against confusing the pleasing sensations of yoga and Eastern meditation with the Holy Spirit. Pope Francis cautions, you can take 1,000,000 courses in yoga and Zen, but all of this will never be able to give you the freedom of God's love. Evangelicals lack unified theological authority structures. Individuals who object to yoga cite at least one of two reasons. First, they worry about idolatry, prayer to or worship of gods other than Yahweh. Contrary to the Bible's first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. The Old Testament cautions against emulating how other cultures petition their gods. You must not worship the Lord your God in their way. The New Testament forbids reverencing images of birds and animals and reptiles. Christian critics worry that Surya Namaskara developed as a prayer to the solar deity Surya, and that many postures emulate animals associated with divine beings. Evangelical Marcia Montenegro argues that Christian yoga is an oxymoron. Just as there is no Christian Ouija board and no Christian astrology, so there is no Christian yoga that is either truly yoga or truly Christian. Pentecostal and charismatic Christians may express a second concern, that yoga postures and breathing techniques invite spirits other than the Holy Spirit to occupy the bodies of practitioners, causing physical and spiritual harm. Pentecostal and former yoga instructor Karina Kraft envisions sun salutations as a moving liturgy, an embodied form of worship that incorporates acts of bowing, petition, receiving and surrender, and thanksgiving, and functions as a whole-body sign language to the spirit realm, beckoning or inviting spirits to respond and engage in practitioners' lives. For Kraft, it does not matter whether the practitioner knows or agrees with these meanings because practice implies consent. Doing is the active form of agreeing. Practice attracts and engages spirits who co-authored yoga. Historic roots matter because authorship implies ownership, and ownership implies right of possession and control. Kraft continues, the spirit realm knows what belongs to it, just as a stolen Lexus can be traced back to its rightful owner, even if the thief removes the license plate and reupholsters the interior, so too yoga, misappropriated by naive Westerners, can be traced back to Hindu spirits who are not fooled by a little revamping. They've got the serial number and title deed, so to speak. They'll get back in their vehicle while you're driving it. By this logic, Christians do not own yoga and have no right to remove religion or repurpose it as Christian. Yet, Christian yoga is on the rise. A 1998 survey reported that most American yoga practitioners were college-educated, urban, non-Christian women. 10 years later, Christians had joined the ranks of self-described American yogis. A 2007 Christianity Today poll found that 4% of those less active in church and 2% of those more active used yoga to grow spiritually. Christians are still less likely than other Americans to participate. A 2013 survey noted that 73% of practitioners in Austin, Texas, view yoga as a spiritual activity. Although respondents came from multiple religions, there were fewer Christians and more religious nuns, N-O-N-E-S, and others. 41% identified as Christian. By comparison, 48% of Austin's population has a Christian affiliation. 59% identified with no or another religion, compared with 52% of the total population. The gap between Christian and other practitioners is actually narrow. Some Christians are attracted to practices adapted from Asian religions because of the spiritual benefits. Christians may turn to yoga to fill lacunae in Christian traditions, which they perceive as overly intellectual, uninteresting, or body-denying, or as enriched by insights from other religions. But worried by non-Christian roots, they Christianize these practices. Father Thomas Ryan, director of the Paulist North American Office for Ecumenical Interfaith Relations, is a certified Kripalu yoga instructor who envisions yoga prayer sacramentally, as a way to pray with your whole body. By contrast to Christian ascetic disciplines and valorization of physical suffering as sanctifying the spirit, for Ryan, yoga reveals that salvation doesn't mean getting out of the skin, rather being transfigured and glorified in it. Those Christians aptly characterized by the historian Mark Knoll as culturally adaptive, biblically experiential evangelicals replace non-Christian with Christian language, supplemented by religion-neutralizing references to scientific studies. Christian yoga and Christian alternatives to yoga appear to solve the dilemma of how to access non-Christian spiritual resources while remaining a faithful Christian. The label Christian yoga functions first to mark an intention to repurpose a practice for Christian uses, and second, to market a product to Christian consumers. The initial step is to add Christian identifiers. For example, Christ-centered yoga, Yahweh yoga, and Christoga.
Hi, I'm Janine Turner. Welcome to Christoga, Christian Yoga.
Yoga-filled body?
Christ-filled souls. What a fabulous opportunity to spend a half hour, an hour, stretching and toning your body and worshiping with Jesus Christ at the same time.
And once more, please. Inhaling, rising, lifting your hands, lifting your heels. Putting the palms out, exhaling, and lower. Draw your hands together in prayer. Two workouts in one. Strength for the body.
Strength for the soul.
Some programs take linguistic separation a step further by subtracting the word yoga, given its connotation of yoking with the divine, and insist on the non-equivalence with yoga of alternatives, such as outstretched in worship. Holy Fit and praise moves.
Okay, we're going to start with Mount Zion posture. And let's roll our shoulders, okay, because we've been sitting for a while, huh? Let's try some movements of the arms too while we're here. Just getting nice movements back and forth. And then we're going to come forward, reaching down kind of like a windmill. Good. And it's good if we could all go the same way. The effective fervent prayer.
The effective fervent prayer
of a righteous man.
Of a righteous man
avails much.
Avails much.
James 5:16.
James 5:16.
I'm doing yoga poses while reciting biblical scripture. I don't have any problem with the exercise, but I find the whole situation rather odd. It looks and feels like yoga, but is it?
Gives me life.
Job 33:4.
Job 33:4.
We're certainly aware that it looks like yoga, you know. That's totally fine if people say that. But we believe yoga is a spiritual practice. And we're not doing that. Dear Laura, thank you.
Such programs reflect core evangelical emphases identified by the historian David Bebbington: biblicism through biblical framing, activism in energetically recruiting others, conversionism by insisting that programs draw participants closer to Christ, and crucicentrism in the sense of dedicating sun salutations to the Son, Jesus. Evangelical adaptations of yoga and the creation of yoga alternatives presume that practices can be Christianized through linguistic substitution. Sun salutations are christened sun, S-O-N, salutations. To begin, stretch your arms overhead into praise hands. Reach your heart and your arms to heaven, sending your greeting to Jesus. End in prayer position at heart center, the fourth of 7 chakras, feeling the movement of energy. Classes close with corpse pose, resting in God's grace. Pranayama, controlled breathing to circulate impersonal vital energy, is reimagined as breathing in the Holy Spirit. Namaste is retranslated, the image of God in me honors the image of God in you. The mantra Om may be replaced by Shalom. Evangelicals typically add Bible verses and prayers to traditional poses or relabel them with Christian references, such as prodigal son, Noah's arch, Lazarus, holy rollers, eagle, angel, rainbow, and altar. Rarely, programs add new poses, as with the Jewish Aleph-Bet Yoga's emulation of Hebrew alphabet letters. Most Americans, including Christians, know little about the history of yoga or South Asian religions. Lack of knowledge stems in part from fear that learning about other religions may lead to doctrinal error. Evangelical students in my religious studies classes disclose parental concerns that I will indoctrinate them in pluralism. Paradoxically, fear of learning about religions can make it more likely that Christians will engage in practices of the religions they fear. By evangelical logic, if someone dedicates a practice to Jesus, it is by definition Christian. It is difficult to refute testimonial claims like that of Christianity Today writer Agnieszka Tennant. The 3 hours a week I spend doing yoga draw me closer to Christ. They are my bodily kinetic prayer. An Amazon.com customer explains that she purchased a Christoga DVD because I was worried that my prayer life was lacking. This is an excellent way to incorporate Christ's word into your soul. Christians who see no problem with Christoga's amalgamation of Christian and Hindu beliefs and practices do worry that it is immodest for Christian yogini Janine Turner to reveal her belly button. Praise moves elicits less criticism from evangelicals, in part because founder Laurette Willis tucks her blouse into her leggings. Holy Yoga developer Brooke Boone summarily dismisses criticisms by insisting on her evangelical identity. Remember that in Holy Yoga, the answer to practically every question is 2 words: Jesus Christ. Claiming devotion to Jesus is the ultimate evangelical argument stopper. This brings us to a question. Does explicitly Christian yoga lead people toward the kinds of spirituality associated with traditional yoga? Holy Yoga is among the most popular Christian yoga programs with 1,700 certified instructors. While we were participating in this morning's conference sessions, Holy Yoga was hosting a 4-hour Holy Yoga experience in 36 cities, and it was sharing its Christ-honoring experience. Holy Yoga reinterprets Christian doctrine by incorporating beliefs from South Asian religions. For example, Om is the vibrational sound of the universe that creates and combines energies in yoga classmates. Prayer does the same thing as chanting Om because Jesus, the Word of God, is the vibration that God used in speaking the universe into creation. God created humans as physical and energetic beings, and chakras are energy centers that echo what God has created. Brooke Boone attests that traditional yoga beliefs about energy, Om, and chakras make sense to me. Such beliefs may come to make sense to other Holy Yoga practitioners, who may also become more likely to explore traditional yoga. Psychological research on branding shows empirically that brand extension advertising facilitates parent brand recall. If we think of yoga as a parent brand and Holy Yoga as a brand extension, it stands to reason that favorable experience with Holy Yoga may facilitate favorable reception of the parent brand, traditional yoga, and its associated concepts. Christian yogis react defensively to criticism because they get something from yoga that they do not get from other forms of exercise or church. When Southern Baptist Theological President Albert Mohler voiced surprise at Christian commitment to yoga in a 2010 Associated Press interview, several hundred Christian readers sent Mohler angry emails. One devoted Southern Baptist church member explained, "I get much more out of yoga and meditation than I ever get out of a sermon in church." Many Americans have come to perceive church as irrelevant, boring, or worse. Not only is there a rise in the number of religious nuns, but a groundswell of religious duns, D-O-N-E-S, the most committed, theologically orthodox church members who are leaving church because it seems more of a hindrance than a help to spiritual growth and service. Some have sought revitalization by converting to Roman Catholicism or Orthodoxy, gravitating toward an innovative emerging church, trading soporific sermons for streamlined megachurch productions, seeking intimate, authentic community in a house church, or enrolling in a school of supernatural ministry where course offerings include personal prophecy, healing the sick, and raising the dead 101. And others have taken up yoga. As one Christian yogi notes, the churches are emptying, the yoga centers are full. Yoga has not only entered the Christian mainstream, but also the American mainstream, as epitomized by nominally secular public school yoga programs. These programs have polarized Christians and reveal how Christians can ironically contribute to their own marginalization. The first American public schools provided Christian religious and moral instruction. The Massachusetts Bay Colony passed a school law in 1642 to ensure that all children received a good education that instilled principles of religion and inoculated youth against growing rude, stubborn, and unruly. 19th century common schools promoted non-sectarian instruction that avoided denominational doctrines while teaching presumably universal, though distinctively Protestant, religious values deemed necessary to moral character and civic virtue. In the mid-20th century, the Supreme Court prohibited public schools from promoting prayer and Bible reading, interpreting these practices as violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Protestants facilitated these court rulings by opposing funding for Catholic parochial schools. Since the late 20th century, educational reformers have increasingly envisioned yoga and meditation as filling a perceived moral void in non-religious, thus constitutionally permissible ways. Public school yoga and meditation programs are proliferating. A 2015 survey identified 36 distinct U.S. school-based yoga programs, 15 of which require Yoga Alliance certification. These schools have trained 5,400 instructors and offer yoga in 940 public schools. Well over 1 million public school students have received instruction in mindfulness or transcendental meditation. The introduction of yoga and meditation to public schools reflects a perceived crisis in American education that Christianity has, by many accounts, failed to solve. Program advocates cite statistics on school shootings, single-parent homes, child depression, suicide, drug abuse, obesity, and pregnancy, and worry about underachievement, technology overdose, and an epidemic of judgmental, unkind attitudes and behaviors. Nominally secular yoga promises not only to trim and fit flabby young bodies, but also to instill values and cultivate character. Let's take an example: Ashtanga yoga in California's Encinitas Union School District. The Indian Hindu Sri Krishna Pattabhi Jois developed modern Ashtanga yoga, or 8-limbed yoga, in Mysore, India. The 8 limbs are 1, yama, moral restraint; 2, niyama, ethical observance; 3, asana, posture; 4, pranayama, breath control; 5, pratyahara, calm mind; 6, dharana, attention; 7, dhyana, meditation; and 8, samadhi, union with the supreme Brahman, or in Joyce's words, becoming one with God. Joyce focused his teaching on the 3rd limb, asanas, or postures, because he was confident that practitioners would inevitably experience all 8 limbs. To quote Joyce, "Anyone who practices will experience God inside, and the love of God will develop whether they want it or not." Beginning in the 1970s, Westerners traveled to India to study with Joyce. In 1973, Joyce student David Williams brought Joyce to Encinitas in San Diego County, California, a city claimed for yoga in 1937 by Yogananda's building of Self-Realization Fellowship Ashram. After visiting Encinitas, K.P. Joyce returned home, but his son Manju took up residence to teach yoga. Manju's wife Nancy taught kindergarten in the Encinitas Union School District, EUSD. One of Joyce's devotees, Sonia Jones, wife of hedge fund billionaire Paul Tudor Jones, founded Joyce Yoga in 2008 in loving dedication to her guru, and in 2011 incorporated Joyce Yoga's nonprofit counterpart, the KP Joyce USA Foundation. The foundation's mission was to bring the philosophy, teachings, and values of Sri K. Pattabhi Joyce to youth in underserved communities by funding school yoga and supporting changes in public policy to require yoga and meditation competency in public education credentialing and mandate yoga and meditation in all classrooms. The foundation got started by giving USD $4 million to co-develop a district-wide Ashtanga yoga program taught by foundation selected, trained, and supervised teachers, and to co-author a curriculum for the foundation to use in other districts. When in 2013, Christian parents sued EUSD for allegedly promoting Hinduism through yoga, administrators overcame the legal challenge by adopting a characteristically evangelical strategy, relabeling Ashtanga yoga as EUSD yoga and subtracting Sanskrit terminology and cultural references. I got a bird's eye view of this trial by serving as an expert witness, asked by the plaintiffs to explain the contested meanings of religion and Ashtanga yoga. Despite some linguistic repackaging, at the time of trial, EUSD children were still using Sanskrit terms such as namaste, often translated "the divine in me bows to the divine in you," and shavasana, or corpse. They were forming circles with their thumb and forefinger in wisdom gesture, jnana mudra, symbolic of subordinating the individual spirit, Atman, to the universal spirit, Brahman. And they were chanting Om, often identified as the sound of the divine. Children were also putting their palms together by their chest in prayer position, Anjali mudra, and closing their eyes to meditate while sitting in lotus, or Padmasana, with one or both feet above the knees. The judge was persuaded that lotus had been defanged by renaming it crisscross applesauce. Videos reveal that teachers are saying lotus, and the curriculum never uses the phrase crisscross applesauce, but uses lotus 194 times.
To start on the next bell, just seated lotus. As if you're floating on a lily pad. Inhale, zip up your spine, relax your fingers, wiggle them out. Drop your head and then find stillness. Bring your attention to the sound of your breath. And notice how it's making you feel. And at the sound of the last bell, uprooted lotus. Find your final resting pose. If you would like your legs swung, let me know by putting one hand on your tummy, one hand on your heart.
To the present day, EUSD yoga, like Ashtanga yoga, always begins with opening sequence A, Surya Namaskara, established by Joyce as a prayer to the sun god Surya. EUSD classes still always finish with lotus and rest. Postures explained in EUSD's pilot year textbook as facilitating concentration, meditation, and ultimately samadhi. Emboldened by the Encinitas victory, the Joyce Foundation rolled out its curriculum nationally and internationally. Rebranded as Sonema, a neologism from founder Sonia Jones and her associate Salima Ruffin, and then as Pure Edge, which abbreviates as PE. By 2016, the foundation had taught yoga and meditation to over 40,000 children in 114 partner schools in 9 school districts and 6 U.S. regions, as well as Kenya, Africa, and had convinced the New York legislature to pass a resolution establishing a Health and Wellness Week. To date, most challenged school districts have, like EUSD, permitted parents to opt their children out of yoga and meditation. Such allowances depend upon implicit acknowledgement that such programs are arguably religious. Most schools do not allow opt-outs from math or dodgeball. Classroom teachers are not always allowed to opt out of school-wide yoga or meditation. For example, teachers in British Columbia and California have lost their classrooms for refusing to teach the Mind Up Mindfulness curriculum. Certain well-funded school yoga and meditation proponents have publicly articulated agendas of making their programs mandatory. KP Joyce urged making Yogasana, the Surya Namaskara, and their traditions compulsory for all students in all educational institutions. The Joyce Sonema Pure Edge Foundation's public policy goal is to make yoga and meditation a requirement for teacher credentialing and an essential component of the education system. Actress and movie producer Goldie Hawn's mission is to get Mind Up into every school and absolutely mandated. The Calmer Choice mindfulness curriculum is intended as a universal intervention that every student is expected to attend. Math, science, history, mindfulness, and English, just part of what was part of their day. By not effectively opposing or even supporting yoga and meditation, Christians may unknowingly facilitate a move toward mandatory programs. The Encinitas controversy sheds light on a tense relationship between yoga and Christianity in American culture. Encinitas is a religiously divided community. As a New York Times article observed in 2012, EUSD serves the liberal beach neighborhoods as well as more conservative inland communities. On the coast, bumper stickers reading "Keep Leucadia Funky" are borne proudly. Farther inland, cars are more likely to feature the Christian fish symbol, and large evangelical congregations play an important role. When the Sedlock v. Baird yoga lawsuit went to trial in 2013, 45% of Encinitas residents practiced yoga, compared with a 9% national average. Although 40% of the Encinitas population identified as Christian, compared with 70% nationally, only one Christian family, Jennifer and Stephen Sedlock, stepped forward as petitioners. 6 other Christian families submitted legal declarations, and 269 signatories, at least one of whom was Hindu, added their voices of protest to an online petition. Although more Christians than the Sedlocks objected to EUSD yoga, most of them had personal reasons for not wanting to become a lightning rod in a public controversy. Fewer than 1% of EUSD parents opted their children out of yoga, which comprised a majority of state-mandated PE minutes. Other Christian parents knew or cared little about the yoga program, or else they wanted to join in. Although many school yoga and meditation programs have spawned complaints, often from Christians, but also Hindus, Buddhists, and atheists, Sedlock remains the only high-profile litigation. Given the close associations of yoga and meditation with Hinduism, Buddhism, and other religious and spiritual traditions, it is less surprising that there are Christian protesters than that their ranks are thin. Since Sedlock, I regularly receive cold contact emails from Christians across the US and Canada who are worried about yoga or meditation in their local schools and frustrated in their efforts to persuade school officials or even other Christians that the programs are religious or conflict with Christianity. One of the most striking features of these emails is the theme of isolation. These are Christians who feel like they're the only ones who care. A father from Virginia recounted that pastors tell me how misinformed I am to consider that mindfulness might be religious. Thanks for listening. I feel like I'm alone here. An Ohio father lamented the indifference and even defensiveness of many Christians. A mother and pastor in New York was baffled by the utter apathy of school officials and Christian parents who refused to read the information she sent them before discounting her concerns. These complainants are the embattled evangelicals described by the sociologist Christian Smith. They are confident in the moral superiority of their opposition to yoga and meditation, but finding little traction from their personal influence strategy, they feel that American culture, including large swaths of Christian culture, has rejected their warnings and consigned them personally to the status of second-class citizens, unwelcome in the public square. Such Christians lament their woes to any who will lend a sympathetic ear, but they rarely lobby to change laws or enlist help from the courts to enforce laws. Exhibiting a tendency that Christian Smith dubs voluntaristic absolutism, evangelicals call the nation to be in compliance with Christian religious ideals, yet resist collective action because they want this compliance to be voluntary, effected through one-on-one persuasion. Christians who have sought legal representation report difficulties finding attorneys willing to take their case or raising funds to litigate. Christians who do form a united front have had somewhat more success in influencing school boards. When in 2014, a school district in Bloomington, Indiana, proposed introducing Mind Up, a coalition of 12 Christian pastors banded together. The school board tabled the proposal once they realized that it could incite a financially costly exodus of Christians from the public schools. Yet, 3 years later, one district school started teaching mindfulness, this time without informing parents. Non-evangelical school administrators are rarely persuaded by pleas of religious discrimination, especially when issued by wealthy white Protestants like the Sedlocks. Many non-evangelicals resent the long history of Protestant dominance in U.S. cultural institutions, especially since even Supreme Court rulings have not fully disestablished Protestantism from public schools. Evangelicals who want prayer but not yoga may be denounced as judgmental and hypocritical. Christian critics do not help their case by worrying vaguely that yoga is inherently religious. Such critics sense religious tension at a gut level, but they lack knowledge or vocabulary to explain why yoga violates their conscience. Comparing pro-yoga and anti-yoga social media, email listservs, and websites reveals that critics cite fewer academic sources, articulate less nuanced arguments, and make more typographical and grammatical errors. The inability of Christian critics to elucidate their concerns reflects an educational disparity. National surveys indicate that evangelicals have somewhat lower educational attainments than the general population. 20% of evangelicals are college educated, as compared with 27% of the total adult population. Hindus, 77%, are college educated, and Buddhists, 44%, are college educated, have higher attainments. During the Sedlock trial, not only the opposing attorneys, but even the judge mocked the plaintiffs for wearing the religion on their sleeve as they haltingly attempted trial by Wikipedia. Today's situation may recall the Scopes Monkey trial of 1925, in which fundamentalist Christians technically won a court case challenging evolution, but opponents disparaged them as intellectually and religiously backwards. Modern evangelicals are better educated than their fundamentalist predecessors, but many lack training for yoga culture wars. Evangelicals are poorly equipped to engage reflectively with popular culture because most lack interest in rigorous historical and theological study that could pinpoint continuities and discontinuities with Christian traditions. One impact is that Christian yoga and public school yoga may exacerbate intercultural tensions. Christians have long struggled to present themselves and their message to cultural outsiders in winsome ways. Activist evangelicals are particularly zealous to share what they envision as good news that others need for temporal happiness and eternal salvation. Yet, it is difficult to preach Christ without being perceived by audiences as disrespecting their cultures. Promoters of Christian and secular yoga face the twin charges of cultural appropriation and cultural imperialism. Hindu spokespersons blame yoga popularizers for distorting yoga. Although certain Indian Hindu yogis, famously Vivekananda and Yogananda, have recruited Americans and vaunted yoga as building a bridge between cultural divides, other Hindus expressed dismay at American reinterpretations. In 2008, the Hindu American Foundation initiated a Take Back Yoga campaign, calling for public acknowledgement that yoga is rooted in Hinduism. Indian American yoga teacher Susanna Barkataki argues that when someone from the dominant culture teaches yoga without acknowledging the roots of the practices, they are culturally appropriating yoga, using their power to exploit South Asian cultural riches. Answering the thorny question, who owns yoga, Subhas Tiwari of Hindu University of America insists that yoga originated in Hindu culture and dubs Christian yoga religious schizophrenia. Yogi Baba Prem alleges that Christian yogis are secretly practicing Hinduism without having to renounce their Christian tradition. Denying that anyone owns yoga, evangelists for Christian or secular yoga may unthinkingly impose yoga on other cultural groups. Public school programs target low-income African Americans and Latinos, whom promoters view as lacking virtues instilled by yoga. A 2012 article in Teaching Tolerance lauds a Title I Atlanta school that uses yoga to quell bickering and fussing and as a strategy for proactively managing classroom behavior. In 2013, the Sonima Foundation funded Ashtanga yoga in New York City public schools comprised of minority youth, mostly Black or Hispanic. The justification for a 2010 yoga study in Baltimore schools attended by African Americans, mixed race, and Latino children is that youth in underserved urban communities are at risk for a range of negative outcomes, chronically stressed, and need help enhancing self-regulatory capacities. Implicit is a racial narrative in which people of color are at risk because they have lesser self-regulatory capacities, and a religious narrative in which Christian practices have failed America's children. The supposed beneficiaries of philanthropically funded yoga may already have cherished religious resources to cope with life's challenges. African American and Latino communities are statistically more religiously active and predominantly Christian than the Caucasian populations who typically fund and administer programs. One Catholic, Spanish-speaking woman from El Salvador withdrew from a yoga study for religious reasons, complaining that the teacher's beliefs were being imposed on her and that a statue of Patanjali seemed diabolic. Christian and secular yoga programs may not only alienate certain South Asian Hindus who decry cultural theft, but also African American and Latino Christians bequeathed yoga. My goal this evening has been to suggest that yoga exemplifies the fraught relationship of Christianity and American culture. Wheaton College's effort to redeem yoga through linguistic substitution reflects a perception that church traditions have grown stale. Ashtanga yoga in the Encinitas Union School District and the specter of mandatory yoga are emblematic of divisions among Christians, the frustration of many Americans with Protestant dominance, and a broad-based pursuit of moral cultivation through yoga spirituality. Naivete about how practices can change beliefs by these culturally adaptive evangelicals may lead to a feeling of being embattled by others, even as Christians undercut their own professed beliefs, contribute to their own marginalization, and participate in processes deemed cultural appropriation and cultural imperialism that hinder their evangelistic goals. In the final analysis, Christian yoga may be nothing new under the sun, S-U-N, or sun, S-O-N, but it may usher in a new era in the relationship of Christianity and culture.